Alright, we're back with some more Smite history, because you guys seem to love these looks back at how things used to be. Today is 10 things only OG Smite players remember. It's a fancy title for YouTube views, but basically we're taking a look back at the younger years of Smite, like beta and the early seasons, and how the game was back then. Either as a remembrance for people who've been playing a long time like me, or an insight into how Smite was back then for all you newer players. So let's get right into it with number 10. Alright, so at number 10 we have stacking buffs. So buff stacking is a super OG thing from way back in closed beta. I've played Smite for over 5 years and I still wasn't around when buff stacking was a thing. So by buff stacking, I'm referring to jungle buffs and the fact that you could stack multiple buffs active onto your player simultaneously. So as it is right now, like every role has their own little buff. Jungle has speed, solo has blue, but back then you could stack all the buffs onto one player if you wanted to. So a jungler could run around with speed buff and red buff and just destroy anyone they wanted. Not too much is really known about how this was in terms of balance and what was strong, because it was back in really early closed beta when this was a thing, but it seems like it would have been super broken based on the theory. At least today it would be. I've heard stories of closed beta Odin who was quite a bit different back then, running rampant, stacking health and defense buffs onto himself and basically being immortal early on, and still dealing insane amounts of damage as Odin usually does. But I imagine other characters like pre-rework Kali or Arachne would have been super strong with like a speed and red buff combo or something similar. I highly doubt we're going to see buff stacking return to Smite, but it certainly seemed like an interesting time for sure. Number 9, the HIREZ troll icon. So this one doesn't go back quite as far, but it was probably something you will know about if you experienced it back in the day. You'll probably remember it. So back around the time of the Smite launch tournament at the end of beta, HIREZ gave out, I believe it was 663 free gems to all players. This was back in a time where free gems was unheard of, by the way, and this was the first time HIREZ had ever given out free gems to players, let alone over 600 of them. Then a few patches later, they added the HIREZ troll icon, which cost 64 gems and refunded 1 gem after buying it. So by this point, everyone had spent 600 of their free gems on skins or whatever, and they had 63 gems remaining in their accounts that they probably want to get rid of because it's a really awkward number. But at that time, you couldn't really buy anything significant for 63 gems, especially not for that exact amount. And even though the HIREZ troll icon may as well have cost 63 gems because it was 64 and refunded 1, people couldn't buy it if they only had 63 gems. They needed 64 to initially activate the purchase, of course, and then get 1 gem refunded. This was also a way for people to get a really awkward gem amount. So if someone bought the icon for 64 gems thinking it would remove their awkward gem count, they got given 1 gem back and had to deal with 1 gem on the end of their number for eternity until like they added in other methods of getting free gems. It's just the ultimate troll, really. Number 8, side jungles. So the map probably most of you know and have ever known for Smite is the 3-lane map with jungles in between them, right? Well, back in closed beta, we also had 2 side jungles on the sides of duo and solo lane. These simply connected to the sides of the lane and provided extra space on the map to roam and potentially hide in. Obviously not the type of place you can realistically gank from, as like an enemy will probably see you walking through the lane to get into that side jungle, but nonetheless it did provide extra jungle space for people to roam around in and was often the source of some fights over the buffs that were located there between the lanes. Since at this time it was mostly a 2-1-2 meta without a jungler and both side lanes were duo lanes, making for some pretty interesting 2v2 fights in these side jungle areas. Number 7. Health, CDR, and armor buffs. But those side jungles weren't empty. They also housed these 3 buffs. The health buff gave 10 health regen per second, so basically a constant health potion for 2 minutes, or 50 HP 5 equivalent. Armor buff gave 50 of each protection, so magical and physical. This was definitely the most broken of the 2, basically giving an entire item worth of defense, basically for free. Especially early game, having 50 protections of both kinds was absolutely insane. And finally, the cooldown reduction buff just gave 15% CDR. If that sounds familiar, it's because it was merged with the blue buff to get what we have today, giving mana regen and CDR in a single buff. Back then, they were separate buffs. The health and armor buffs were removed from the game before the end of closed beta though, along with the side jungles, and we haven't had any kind of hints of them returning as of yet. Though of course we have gotten the purple buff as a replacement of sorts for these, though definitely not even close to as broken, especially with the protections buff. That's more than an entire spirit robe worth of defense just from picking up a jungle buff, man, that must have been insane. Number 6, Guardian VULCAN. So I'm not going to go into full details about old VULCAN in this video, but if you do want a full overview of his rework and his old kit, check out my reworked gods video in the card here. But basically, VULCAN was a guardian at release who revolved much more around his turrets. And yes, I said turrets because he had 2. He had his initial turret that he still has now, and he also had a circular AoE damage thumper turret instead of a magma bomb. And his ultimate was basically just a sort of buff that buffed him and all his active turrets with power, defenses, and bonus effects. As far as I'm aware, he was very trash in this state though, as he relied way too much on his turrets to do anything useful. Like, think of modern day VULCAN and his magma bomb, how much burst he had none of that burst damage and was simply a walking target while he tried to get his turrets to actually do useful things. But it ultimately didn't work out, and he was of course reworked into the VULCAN that we know today and somewhat love. Number 5. Old Hu Yi Jump. If you were around for Hu Yi's release, you'll definitely remember this. It was one of the strangest abilities they'd ever added to the game at the point of his release for sure. So right now, Hu Yi Jump is a nice, short, snappy jump that you can get out of danger or catch someone out with the knock-up. Well, at release, instead of being able to leap up and jump down pretty much instantly, he just kinda hovered in the air, moving around before landing. It was really weird. It was just a super weird thing for a hunter to have, really. Like, especially on a hunter, it just seems super strange. And of course, it was reworked pretty quickly. I guess the idea of it was almost that of something like a Freya ultimate, where he could banish himself for an extended period of time to avoid damage and keep himself safe. But the slow speed on it and the predictability of his dash, along with no CC immunity, made it much more like a Neath backflip, where you could just chase him to where he was going to land and then he's used his mobility and he's fucked. So the modern day jump is definitely an improvement, I think. Number 4. Magical gods with physical auto attacks and YMIR with Deathbringer. So back in closed beta, all auto attacks did physical damage and any god could build any item, regardless of their class and primary damage type. So basically, you would have YMIRs and Freyas running around with Deathbringer and crit amongst other wacky things. So yeah, YMIR's passive doubles his basic attack damage on targets with Frostbite, and then Deathbringer would double that again, plus the additional 50% damage from Deathbringer's passive. Basically, YMIR could one-punch people at this point, and it was as hilarious as it sounds. If you think Polynomicon, Soul Reaver, Cabrakan is stupid, you clearly haven't witnessed a YMIR bop you for 1000 damage with a single auto attack. This seemed like it was absolutely nuts back in the day, and I'm kinda sad that I didn't get to experience it. If any of you were around for this crazy era of Smite, leave your stories and experiences below. I'm sure everyone will be happy to hear them. Number 3. Buying stats directly from the store. Another closed beta feature, and by buying stats from the store, I mean literally that. You could walk into Fountain and just buy 5% CDR for like 500 gold. Those numbers aren't accurate, but you get the point. This allowed you to basically get tons of every stat if the game went long enough, even without needing additional item slots or anything. It was much less efficient in terms of cost to do this over buying an item, but eventually, if you had enough spare gold when you finished your full build, got all your potions and stuff like that, you could have 0 CDR items and still have full CDR. Sounds pretty wild to me. With the no boots builds in late game conquest matches now, you can get some pretty crazy crit builds going, but in this era, so long as you had the game go long enough and you farmed enough gold, you could literally buy your way to 100% crit chance and the attack speed cap. It sounds AIDS, but I bet it would have been fun for testing things out. Number 2. Old War and the Shake and Bake. So Old War, as most of you probably know, is the affectionate nickname we give to New War's old kit design. As with Guardian VULCAN, I won't go fully into this rework, but basically she had Ganesha's ultimate as hers, a ranged small AoE stun that could also hit towers as her 3, and a passive that gave her additional effects as she activated crystals by using her abilities. Once she got all 4 crystals activated for her 1, 2, 3 and ultimate, she turned into a snake and had a ton of different bonus effects. Her ultimate also allowed for the commonly known and widely revered Shake and Bake combo, where you drag someone through the walls of Old War's ultimate repeatedly and kill them near instantly. That was so much fun. You could argue Ganesha's ultimate works in a similar way, but it's not the same. With that, Fenrir just holds you inside to take damage at the ultimate until you die. With Old War's ultimate, you actually took damage every time you touched the walls, and it was a lot of damage at that. So basically, if Fen spammed you in and out of the walls area 10 times, you took about 4,000 damage and just insta-died. And also as a quick note, not necessarily related to Old War, you could also do a somewhat Shake and Bake combo, but it was with Freeze, so not really a Shake and Bake, is it? But yeah, Fenrir with Skadi Eyes could do a very similar thing on Skadi's release, and that was patched out quite quickly. And number 1, Minotaurs. And finally, the old version of Titans, the Minotaurs were basically the same as Titans, but a different model and design. There was also a feature where if the game reached a certain time limit, may have been an hour, but that's unconfirmed, the Minotaurs would march up mid lane and clash in the middle of the map, forcing the game to end eventually. I'm kinda glad and also kind of sad at the same time that this doesn't work like this anymore. In some sense, games that go over an hour are really taxing and a lot of people just want them to end, but there can also be some crazy stuff that can happen in games that go that long, so I'm kind of on the fence about this idea, to be honest. Leave your guys' thoughts below on whether you would have liked the game to work this way. Alright, so that's it for this one. If you did enjoy, then be sure to drop a like before you leave to show me you did, and I shall make some more of these. I have more OG facts waiting in the wings if this is something you like and want to see more of. As always, join our community Discord server linked below for memes, spam and fun times. But that's about it from me. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.